The bus jostled roughly over a pothole as Amara Bennett clutched her sleeping daughter tighter to her chest. Cold air crept in through a cracked window, brushing against her tired face. It had been a brutal 10-hour shift at the Waffle Depot, and now this long, noisy ride through rainy Atlanta. Could you hold your kid tighter or something? She's taking up the whole seat. A gruff voice snapped from behind. Amara flinched, adjusting her hold on little Zuri, whose curls peeked out from beneath a knitted pink cap. "I'm sorry," she murmured, voice raspy from exhaustion. She's sleeping. Before she could shift, Zuri stirred and let out a loud, piercing wail that echoed through the cramped city bus. The bus driver glanced, up in the mirror. "Ma'am, could you calm her down? Folks trying to get home in peace." "I'm trying," Amara whispered, gently bouncing Zuri against her chest. Her arms trembled from fatigue, the chill of the night still clinging to her thin coat. "Shh, baby, please," she whispered, her own voice near tears. But Zuri's cries only grew louder, heads turned, eye rolls, disapproval in every glance. Phones were raised, whispers flying. Then, a calm, deep voice spoke from across the aisle. "Excuse me, mind if I try something?" Amara looked up, startled. Sitting across from her was a sharply dressed black man in his mid-30s, far too polished for a city bus at this hour. Navy peacoat, clean leather gloves resting in his lap, and a kind steadiness in his gaze. "I've got nieces," he said with a small smile. "Sometimes a fresh pair of arms helps." Amara hesitated. Life had taught her not to trust strangers, but the pressure in that moment, the cries, the stares, was too much. With a trembling breath, she nodded and slowly handed Zuri over. The man moved with the practiced ease of someone who knew what he was doing. He cradled Zuri close to his chest, whispering softly. Miraculously, the baby's wails faded to hiccups, then quiet breathing. Amara blinked, stunned. "She likes you," she murmured. "She's warm now. That's all," he said gently. Her body, worn to its limit, finally gave out. Without realizing it, she leaned against the man's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He just adjusted slightly and, wordlessly, removed his coat and draped it over Zuri to keep her warm. No theatrics, no attention-seeking, just kindness. Amara's eyes drifted shut to the steady rhythm of Zuri's breathing, and for the first time in weeks she let herself rest. Amara woke with a sharp inhale, her body stiff and her mind immediately gripped by panic, the unfamiliar weight on her shoulders. The warmth. She blinked hard and looked down. Zuri was still sleeping peacefully in the man's arms, wrapped snug in the navy coat. Amara's heart pounded as embarrassment surged through her. "Oh my God," she whispered, sitting up straight. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. I must have." The man's voice was calm, almost reassuring. "It's all right. You were tired. Anyone would have been." He looked at her, not with pity, but with understanding. "If I had a child," he continued, "I'd hope someone would help me when I couldn't stand another second on my feet." Amara's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. It had been so long since anyone, especially a stranger, had shown her that kind of grace. Zuri stirred in his arms and blinked up sleepily. Her tiny voice, barely audible, mumbled, "You smell like warm," before nestling back into his chest. The man chuckled, the sound low and easy. Amara flushed. "Her name's Zuri," she said, half smiling despite herself. He shifted slightly but still held the child with delicate care. "Nice to meet you both. I'm Malcolm. Malcolm Reed." The bus slowed, brakes hissing as it approached. A stop. Amara looked out and realized this was hers. "This is us," she said quietly, reaching for her daughter. Malcolm passed Zuri over carefully, making sure the coat stayed wrapped around her. Amara met his eyes this time. "Thank you," she said softly, clutching Zuri to her chest. "I don't know what I would have done tonight without you." Malcolm just shrugged modestly. "You'd have figured it out. You're stronger than you think." Amara stepped off the bus and stood on the rain-damp sidewalk, Zuri warm in her arms, As the bus pulled away, its interior lights glowing softly through the fogged windows, she caught one last glimpse of Malcolm's profile before he disappeared into the dark. She hugged Zuri tighter. "We're probably never going to see him again," she whispered. "But he was good," Zuri murmured in her sleep, and Amara began the walk home with a heaviness in her body, but a strange lightness in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel entirely alone. The apartment smelled faintly of reheated noodles and worn carpet. Amara nudged the door open with her shoulder, balancing Zuri on one hip and a grocery bag in her free hand. The hinges groaned like they always did. Inside, the old radiator clanked to life, trying and failing to chase away the Atlanta chill. Amara laid Zuri gently on the couch, wrapping her in their thinnest blanket, then peeled off her damp coat and sank into the creaky kitchen chair. The fridge offered little: half a loaf of bread, a can of beans, and an opened bottle of juice. Payday was still 3 days away. A red-lettered final notice was taped boldly to the fridge door. She rested her face in her hands. No calls had come in from the cleaning gigs she applied to. Zuri had been sent home from daycare again, another cough. And her shifts at the Waffle Depot were getting shorter. Still, her mind wandered. To the bus, to Malcolm, to the warmth of his coat around her baby, the quiet steadiness of his presence, the calm of simply not being judged. He hadn't even asked for her name. She shook her head. A man like that, clean, wealthy, calm, didn't just wander into a life like hers. 2 days passed. Zuri's cough got worse. Amara rubbed her back with vapor cream, read her storybooks until her throat burned, and rocked her to sleep night after night. On a rainy Wednesday afternoon, she poured coffee into a chipped mug at the diner and looked up, and froze. He stepped in through the front door, shaking rain off his coat. He scanned the small dining room until his eyes found hers. Malcolm. A slow smile spread across his face. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said gently. Amara nearly dropped the coffee pot. She fumbled it onto the warmer and wiped her hands on her apron, heart racing. I didn't either," she managed, forcing a small smile. "Guess Atlanta's smaller than I thought." He glanced around. "Busy today?" "Depends on the hour," she said, trying to control the wobble in her voice. "Would you like a table?" "Just coffee," he said, settling at the counter. "Black." She nodded and poured the coffee, setting it gently in front of him. He gave her a small, appreciative nod. Then he said nothing. He didn't pry, didn't press, just sipped quietly, watching her move behind the counter. Amara could feel the weight of his gaze, not heavy, not judgmental, but grounding. And somehow, in the middle of her chaos, she felt calm. The next morning, the air was sharp and brittle. Amara walked slowly down the cracked sidewalk, Zuri finally having slept through most of the night. She took her time. Her shift wouldn't start for another 30 minutes, and moments of peace like this were rare. But something unusual caught her eye as she neared the diner's front door, a paper bag hanging from the handle. She looked around. No one in sight. The street was mostly empty, the muffled sounds of the city humming in the distance. Amara approached slowly and unhooked the bag. It was heavier than she expected. Her brow furrowed as she peered inside. 2 canisters of baby formula, children's, cold syrup, a box of tissues with cartoon animals, and tucked carefully between them, a folded note. "I think Zuri might need these." Amara stood frozen. Her fingers clutched the note, heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't told Malcolm about Zuri's cold. She hadn't mentioned her struggle to afford formula. But somehow, he knew. She brought the bag inside and set it on the counter. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. Part of her heart ached with gratitude, but another part twisted with discomfort. Was this kindness or pity? All through her shift, the bag sat behind the counter. She took orders, cleaned booths, poured coffee, and kept catching herself glancing at it, thinking of him, of the way he hadn't said a word when he saw her working here. The way he'd looked at her, not like a project, not like someone broken, but as if he saw her. Still, the war inside her wouldn't rest. When her shift ended, she didn't go home. She waited, and at 5:30, just as the rain began again, the doorbell chimed. Malcolm walked in. Same calm posture, same steady eyes. Amara stood behind the counter, arms crossed tight. She didn't greet him with a smile this time. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped, more defensive than she meant. He paused, then nodded. "All right. I found the bag. I hoped you would. I didn't ask for help." "No," he said softly. "You didn't." "Then why?" Her voice cracked, frustration bubbling under the surface. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Malcolm met her eyes. No hesitation, no flinch. "Because you're raising a daughter on your own, working double shifts, still smiling at strangers. I saw you on that bus, holding everything together, when you had every reason to fall apart." Her throat tightened. "I'm not a charity case," she whispered. "I never said you were." "Then what am I to you?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're strong," he said. "You're doing what most people would break under. I didn't leave that bag because I thought you were weak. I left it because I saw how hard you're fighting." Amara's arms slowly dropped to her sides, her eyes stung with tears she hadn't invited. "I don't know how to accept things like that," she murmured. "I don't expect you to," Malcolm replied. "Just know it came with no strings, no pity, just respect." She looked at him for a long, silent moment, torn between pride and something deeper. Finally, she gave the faintest nod. Malcolm didn't say another word. He simply smiled and sat at his usual spot at the counter. Saturday sunlight peeked through the bare branches above as Amara walked alongside Malcolm through Central Park. The sidewalks were still damp from last night's rain, and the cold hadn't entirely given up its hold, but it was the warmest day they'd had in a while. She had hesitated when he asked if she and Zuri wanted to take a walk. Coffee at the diner had become familiar, safe, but a park stroll, that felt like more. Still, the way Malcolm had asked, quiet, without pressure, like it was a gift she could choose to open, had nudged something in her chest. Zuri clung to Amara's leg at first, shy behind her pink jacket hood. But eventually, she reached up for Malcolm's hand. Amara's heart squeezed as he adjusted his pace to match Zuri's tiny steps. They passed the playground, the duck pond, and families with strollers. They finally sat on a bench, Zuri between them with a biscuit in one hand and her threadbare stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. "You always come here?" Malcolm asked. "Only when I can walk instead of taking the train," Amara replied. "You seem more rested today." She gave a half laugh. "Looks can be deceiving." There was a pause, just the rustling of the breeze in the trees. Amara stared at the pond, her gaze far away. Then softly, she began to speak. "Zuri's dad left when I was 3 months pregnant, said I ruined his life. My mom, she was my only support, but cancer took her before Zuri's first birthday. After that, it was just me. Rent, diapers, empty shifts, trying to figure it all out with no one to call." Her voice faltered. "Some nights I held her while she cried, and I'd pretend I wasn't crying too." Malcolm's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Just listened. "I stopped trusting people," she admitted. "Not because I wanted to, just because I had to." Zuri tugged at her sleeve, and Amara kissed the top of her daughter's head. Malcolm looked out over the pond. His voice was quieter now. "My mom raised me alone, too. 1-bedroom apartment in Southwest Atlanta. She worked 3 jobs. Some nights, she'd sleep on the floor so I could take the bed." Amara slowly turned toward him. "She never complained," Malcolm continued. "Just smiled. Told me it wasn't that cold. Years later, I found out she sold her coat so I could go to a school dance." Something shifted in Amara's chest. A string pulled tight. I know what it's like to feel small because of a number in your account, Malcolm added. But I also know what love looks like. And I saw it, the night you held Zuri on that bus like the whole world rested in your arms. Amara blinked, her vision blurring. She looked away quickly. I've been lucky, Malcolm said. Worked hard. Invested smart. People assume I've always had money, but I never forgot where I came from, or the woman who taught me never to judge someone by their wallet. Then, without warning, Malcolm stood and walked over to a nearby vendor cart. A few minutes later, he returned with a brown paper bag. He knelt in front of Zuri, pulled out a small teddy bear, soft and worn-looking, one ear bent, eerily similar to her tattered bunny. For you, he said gently. Zuri stared wide-eyed, then slowly reached out and took it. Amara's mouth opened in surprise. How did you... I noticed hers was falling apart, Malcolm said, standing. Figured she deserved a backup. Zuri hugged the new bear tightly, but didn't let go of the old one, just snuggled them together. Amara looked at Malcolm, something fragile in her eyes. No one's ever done anything like that for her. Maybe it's time someone did, he said simply. And in that quiet, honest moment, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not love, not hope. Something deeper. Trust rain drummed against the windows of Amara's small apartment like a steady heartbeat, cold and relentless. Outside, the city lights blurred behind streaks of water. Inside, the air was thick with worry. Zuri lay limp on the couch, her cheeks flushed with fever, her breathing fast and shallow. Amara sat beside her with a damp cloth in one hand and her phone in the other, her mind spiraling. The urgent care clinic had closed early due to flooding. The pharmacy's delivery was delayed for hours. Her neighbor didn't pick up. She called her manager, trying to explain she couldn't make her morning shift. They hung up on her. She stared at her phone, hands shaking. Then, without another thought, she pressed the number she hadn't planned to use again. Malcolm answered on the first ring. Emma's. Zuri's really sick, Amara said, her voice breaking. She's burning up. I don't know what to do. I'm coming, he said, cutting her off gently. Stay with her. I'll be there soon. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Amara opened it to find Malcolm standing there, drenched from the rain, holding a pharmacy bag in one hand and a steaming pot in the other. I stopped by the late-night pharmacy, he said, stepping inside, water dripping from his coat. Got fever reducer electrolyte packs and some ginger rice porridge. Asked them to heat it up. She stared at him, stunned. You really came? He gave her a soft, teasing smile. Of course I did. He set everything on the table, then knelt beside Zuri. Hey, sweetheart, he whispered, brushing her damp curls. Rough night, huh? Zuri whimpered weakly. Let's try this medicine first, Malcolm said, coaxing her with quiet patience. Then I'll tell you the best story you've ever heard. Amara watched wordless as he carefully cradled her daughter in his lap, whispering to her as she swallowed the syrup. Then he picked up one of Zuri's books from the floor and began to read, his voice low and steady, warm against the sound of the storm outside. By the time he finished, Zuri was asleep, her breathing soft and even. Malcolm gently laid her back on the couch and tucked the blanket around her. Then he walked into the kitchen and reheated the porridge. She can eat it in the morning if she's up for it, he said. Amara stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. You didn't have to come, she said quietly. That's when people need someone the most, he replied. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. I don't know how to do this. Be cared for. Malcolm turned to her, meeting her eyes. All my life, she said. People left. Zuri's father, my mom, friends. Every time I needed someone, they disappeared. So I stopped expecting anything. It hurts less that way. Tears spilled down her cheeks, uninvited but unrelenting. Malcolm crossed the room slowly, placed a hand gently on her arm. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. Suddenly, a small voice stirred from the couch. Mommy? Amara rushed over. Yes, baby, I'm right here. But instead of reaching for her, Zuri opened her arms and wrapped them sleepily around Malcolm's neck as he knelt beside them. If you were a pillow, she mumbled, I'd never want to let go. Malcolm let out a soft laugh and hugged her back. Then he looked up at Amara, still holding her daughter. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You and Zuri, you're home now. Amara stared at him, tears falling silently. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And in that quiet, messy, deeply human moment, he leaned in and kissed her. Slow, sure, and filled with every unspoken word between them. When they parted, her forehead rested against his, her fingers tangled gently in his. I don't know how this will work, she whispered. We'll figure it out, Malcolm replied. Together. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Inside, something new had started. Not perfect, but real. Spring had started to nudge winter out of Atlanta, pushing warm air into the sharp corners of the city. The sidewalks wore a layer of yellow pollen, and blossoms peeked through cracked sidewalks. For the first time in years, Amara felt herself exhale without dread curling up behind it, because this time she had said yes. Yes to the job Malcolm offered. Yes to something more than survival. Yes to her own worth. She now worked full-time at Harbor House, Malcolm's foundation for single mothers. The office buzzed with women just like she had once been, tired, stretched thin, unsure they mattered. Amara stood in front of them every day, not as someone who had been saved, but as living proof that broken didn't mean done. She scheduled workshops on budgeting, helped moms apply for daycare vouchers, trained volunteers, created emergency housing rotation for women fleeing unsafe homes. The work was hard. The stories were raw. But they mattered, and every evening she returned home to Zuri, who now ran into Malcolm's arms just as naturally as her own. They weren't a picture-perfect family. They were something better. Together they launched a new project, a housing complex for single mothers with built-in childcare, financial advisors, and counselors. They worked long hours with blueprints, permits, and community boards. Then, one afternoon, while touring the construction site with hard hats on and sleeves rolled up, Amara noticed a painter stenciling a sign by the main gate. She paused and squinted at the fresh letters. It read, Zuri's Place, a new beginning for every mother and child. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Malcolm, who rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. For her, he said. Her hand reached out trembling to touch the painted wood. For both of us, she whispered. But mostly for her. She gave me my fight back. Malcolm nodded, quiet. And you gave it to me. Weeks passed. The building neared completion. Amara thrived in her new role. Her voice grew louder, her step firmer. Confidence bloomed slowly but deeply, like something finally given permission to live. Malcolm never tried to lead for her. He stood beside her, let her take the reins, trusted her. Then, one quiet evening at the office while sorting files, Amara accidentally opened an email left open on Malcolm's screen. It was from an international investment firm in London, a multi-million-dollar contract. CEO position in tech, an offer he had declined 3 months ago. She stared at the screen, frozen. That night, as they walked home beneath the orange glow of streetlights, Amara couldn't hold it in. You turned down that job, she said softly. Malcolm looked at her, then gave a small nod. I did. It was everything, money, power, your whole career. I know. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Why? He took a breath. Because I already have everything I want. Her voice cracked. You gave all that up. For me? Malcolm shook his head. Not for you. Because of you. You reminded me what matters. You made me remember that the best investment I could ever make is in people, in home, in love. He stepped closer, his hands cupping her face. Because you, Amara, you are everything. And in that quiet street, beneath the glow of city lights and the slow rhythm of spring, she kissed him back, not like a woman unsure if she deserved love, but like a woman who finally knew she had earned it. The sun beamed down on the freshly painted walls of Zuri's place, casting long shadows across the community courtyard. Colorful balloons swayed in the breeze beneath a white canopy tent. Volunteers bustled around setting up tables stacked with welcome packets, cupcakes, and name tags. The grand opening had arrived. Dozens of single mothers gathered, some holding babies, others wrangling toddlers. Staff, local supporters, and city officials filled the seats, their faces bright with anticipation, laughter mixed with the hum of hope. Amara stood at the podium in a soft rose blouse, her curls catching the light. She took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd, then down at the front row. Zuri sat in Malcolm's lap, legs swinging, one hand clutching her frayed teddy bear. Amara smiled. She adjusted the microphone and spoke with a clarity and warmth that silenced the crowd. I used to believe I was invisible, she began. I thought that because life was hard, because I was a single mom scraping by, I didn't have value. Murmurs of recognition moved through the mothers in the crowd. I thought survival meant shrinking, that motherhood meant sacrifice, not strength. She paused, locking eyes with Malcolm. But someone reminded me that being tired doesn't mean you're weak, that being a mother doesn't make you less. It makes you more determined, more resilient, more powerful. Applause rippled through the tent. Amara's voice softened. I'm standing here today, not as someone who was rescued, but as someone who remembered her worth, who was reminded that healing is not a gift, it's a right. More applause. A few people wiped tears. She closed with quiet conviction. And I promise to spend the rest of my life reminding other women of the same. As she stepped back, wiping a tear from her cheek, Malcolm stood. Before everyone heads out, he said, his voice carrying through the crowd, there's something I need to ask. He turned toward Amara and dropped to one knee. Gasps and cheers erupted. From his pocket he pulled out a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, but full of meaning. Amara, he said, his voice steady but his eyes shining. You gave me more than love. You gave me purpose, you gave me Zuri. You gave me a future I didn't know I needed. Zuri beamed, her little hands clapping as Malcolm continued. You gave me hope. And a family. Will you marry me? Amara's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, nodding through her sobs. Yes, Malcolm. Of course. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Zuri squealed with delight and ran up, wrapping her arms around both of them. Now we're a forever family. The crowd erupted in applause, laughter, and happy tears. A few weeks later, beneath the wide sky of Centennial Park, Amara stood in a simple lace gown, sunlight making her skin glow like morning. White folding chairs lined the green grass. Soft R&B melody floated from the small speakers. It wasn't extravagant. It was them. Quiet, beautiful, full of heart. Zuri walked ahead of her, proudly scattering flower petals in a white dress with a bright pink sash, clutching her two beloved teddy bears like a queen with her treasures. Malcolm stood at the altar, not in a tux but in a fitted navy suit, his hands clasped nervously, eyes already brimming with tears. When Amara reached him, they didn't need a microphone. Their vows were whispers, raw, honest. I used to be afraid of needing anyone, Amara said, her voice trembling. But you showed me that being held doesn't mean being weak. It means being seen. You reminded me where I came from, Malcolm replied, smiling through his tears. And you showed me what it means to come home. Their kiss was soft but deep, years of struggle, hope, and healing, bound into one moment. As applause rang out, they walked hand in hand into the open field behind the ceremony. Zuri ran ahead to the plaid blanket waiting beneath a tree, then curled up between them, resting her head on Amara's lap. The sun dipped low, streaking the sky in amber and gold. "Do you think sunsets ever get tired?" Zuri mumbled sleepily, her new bear cradled against her chest. Amara laughed gently. "No, baby. They're just taking turns with the moon." Malcolm reached over and laced his fingers through Amara's. And in the slow, golden hush of evening, the three of them sat shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, watching the day end and a new one begin. Together, always. Summer settled over Atlanta with warmth that kissed every corner of Zuri's place. The walls echoed with the sound of children, laughing, of mothers greeting each other like sisters, of hope no longer whispered but spoken proudly. Amara stood in the bustling community center, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back, voice firm but kind as she delegated volunteers, reassured a new mom in tears, and welcomed another woman starting her first night of shelter. She had grown into her power. Every inch of her life now bore fingerprints of choice, not survival. She was no longer the woman crying on the bus. She was the woman helping others out of their darkest hours. At home, Zuri had blossomed. She danced barefoot in the hallway, helped Amara set the table, asked a million questions, and never went to bed without hugging Malcolm. And Malcolm, he had become not just a man Amara loved, but a man she leaned on without fear. He no longer wore sharp suits every day. He spent mornings packing lunchboxes and weekends at community planning meetings. He still had boardrooms waiting for him, but he chose them every time. Together they launched more than housing. They built a family. One afternoon, Zuri came home from school with finger paint all over her shirt and a note clutched in her hand. "Mommy," she said, tugging on Amara's sleeve. "Can we have more bedrooms? One for every mom who doesn't have a place?" Amara smiled and knelt down beside her. "We're working on it, baby. One home at a time." Later that evening, she and Malcolm sat on the front porch, Zuri asleep inside. "You still think you're not enough?" he asked quietly, his hand wrapped around hers. Amara looked out at the community they had built, at the lights glowing in the windows, at the women laughing on the sidewalk below. "No," she said softly. "I think I'm finally more than enough." They leaned into each other. No applause, no audience, just love. The quiet kind, the kind that stays.